There he was. The depth of the crypts had long been forsaken by his ancestors, left to wither and decay. Few living souls had ever dared delve so far below the surface, but Reggie needed answers, and answers he would find. There it was, the item of the search, within the worn leather confines of the tome, the knowledge that many had pursued for centuries.
Hello again.
Oh, for fuck's sake, not this guy.
Listen, you and me, we're buddies, right? We've been through some great times and harrowing times. The fact you continue to watch my videos clearly implies a desire for friendship. This isn't a result of me being hopelessly devoid of physical social relationships after having all potential for friendships neutered by COVID continuously throughout my days of university, resulting in me interpreting any ambiguous pleasantries as indicators for long life affiliation. No, this isn't the desperate yearning for companionship from a man who longs for the days in which people used to call him willingly, by their own volition, to inquire about his life without then asking him for money. No, it's me being completely sane and projecting a reasonable amount of sentimental value onto this digital relationship between viewer and creator. So, I think after we have kindled such a mutual respect between ourselves, I think it's right I share this with you. I'm a furry. I know, shocking. I hope you were sitting down for that. In all seriousness, this label is a bit nebulous to me. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The mainstream view is it's a term for those that possess a niche interest in anthropomorphic animal people to the extent that they dress up as them, imagine themselves as them, and attend massive orgies at every possible opportunity. This isn't actually the case for me, because every time I tried to turn up to the orgy, suddenly people had better things to do. Better things to do that weren't me. Point is, I don't do these things, and I'm likely not alone in that. This label represents me as a simple enthusiast of the aesthetic. To me, animal people are a really interesting and satisfying design for characters, and it also opens up a great opportunity for world building. It's something I think is underutilized by a lot of people in the creative industry. Then again, I kind of get it. Who wants to tie the aesthetic of a budding new IP to an internet term that typically invokes scarring imagery of the many freaks that inhabit the space? The name Messy Tales continues to induce shudders in normally adjusted people across the globe. This drought of understandable origin leaves in me a yearning, a hunger for anthromedia that can satisfy me, that can ruin me, that can leave me with that bittersweet contentment the conclusion of a great tale brings, without making me scared that my 65-year-old father will walk in, see what's upon my screen, and suffer a fatal heart attack. And then, in December of 2021, came along a little game called Tales of Iron. Tales of Iron is an epic RPG adventure that uses its combat as a medium of which to pulverize your spirits. Playing as one of the many of Germa's rats, you must fend off the menacing frog spawn invasion, rebuild your kingdom, and seek vengeance for your fallen brethren and slain father. My decision to play this on stream was one of the best things I've ever decided to do. It is the first game I've ever played to 100% completion. My time spent playing this bout of rat-enforced slaughter is one I look back upon fondly, and I'm thankful the team Oddbug Studio pushed through to completion. Yet today, while I will touch upon its standing as a game, I want to put Tales of Iron under the lens for a specific reason that ties in with my Anthro preamble. How it uses aesthetic to not just enrich, but arguably carry this game into great renown. So please, recline in your throne and gaze upon the kingdom you helped lead into prosperity, because I'm about to explain why Tales of Iron brings joy through its creativity. You'd think in a video in which I am praising something for its artful presentation, I'd start off with said artful presentation. You would be woefully wrong. In classic La Rubric fashion, I have postponed my admiration in favour of pummeling Tales of Iron for its mechanical composition. You see, I like to keep people guessing. My sister follows my Twitter, and, consequently, I keep her in a state of uncertainty as to whether I am a regular virgin or an incel. My parents pass their days musing over the question as to whether I am a straight male or a closeted fruit bowl. And you are guessing as to when the fuck I'll get to the point. Tales of Iron is simple in its gameplay. This is you, Reggie, the youngest son of the king and the world's most renowned frog racist. You can swing a one-handed weapon, a two-handed weapon, block incoming attacks, parry, dodge roll, and pelt the enemy with arrows. These are all rather simple components that together form an enjoyable method of butchery, especially when paired with the enemy's differing attacks. Yellow attacks are to be parried, giving you an open window for a swift counterattack, while red attacks have to be dodged and ranged attacks have to be blocked. Two-handed weapons can also be charged up in the swing to knock over the enemy, very good for use against shielded foes. There's really not much to be said about this system. It's as complex as a 2.5D game can afford to be, but also engaging enough that it's a welcome system throughout the entire game. Features like the bow and a two-handed weapon get added progressively throughout the game, tacking on newer components that change combat and help against new enemies arriving. This is also accompanied by sections of the game where you explore different parts of a world map, where the introduction of the tools such as the two-handed axe allow you to destroy barricades and visit blocked off passages for better loot and armor. Overall, it's a lot of fun. The most fun I've had with a game like this, really. Surely then, some of you may be suggesting that this game is perfect. Well, as a wise man once said, you must be a goose of the silly variety. There's no real glaring issue with the gameplay, but, ironically, a tiny group of small issues that then together form a somewhat noticeable frog-shaped blemish on the overall quality of Tales of Iron. The first thing that has to be mentioned is the pacing, which affects both the gameplay and the narrative. The game starts off with the big tragedy. Your dad gets killed, your people get slaughtered, and you have to fight your way back to the castle and then the local village through hordes of marauding frogs. The beginning is very typical of a fantasy story, but it's strong and straightforward. I do like that. There's a known enemy, known loss, and known stakes to the affair. But upon arriving to the mid-game, it feels almost stagnant. The frogs suddenly aren't much of a problem during the reconstruction of your kingdom, and instead, you're fighting droves of mosquitoes and grubs in these mandatory side quests that really beg the question as to why they're even side quests. You have to complete most of them to advance the story, and, due to the manner in which they unlock, in a set order. It's the weakest part of the game for me because of how the game shelves the frog menace, the whole point of the conflict, and focuses way too long on side plots that just don't really intrigue me as much. And this isn't necessarily because of a lack of variety. There are many different creatures and bugs that sustain the length of which you have to fight them, but it just didn't summon the same amount of excited anticipation as it did when I was fighting the frogs. I think this could have been helped if the game just admitted to being a linear game and had you complete and fight enemies in a set order of story beats, as opposed to this fake open world design where you take on mandatory side quests and have to keep running back and forth between the local quest board and the dungeon. It also really waters down the climax of the story. You get to the concluding battle of the game where the frogs are attacking your castle, and you have to chase them down into the crypts where they snatch your older brother and drag him into an area of poison gas. Instead of your little mole buddy giving you a mask and letting you give chase, keeping up the high tempo of the concluding conflict, he instead stops you and says you need to complete more side quests to get money to buy the mask to then come back and continue. This slogs the pacing even further. It makes the last fights of the game that are meant to be this gradual rise to the climax feel extremely rushed, and ultimately it just doesn't make sense. How long have these guys been waiting here with my brother? Were they waiting all this time for a boat? Public transport in the frog swamps really fucking sucks, huh? And then this bleeds into the next noticeable issue, that is the backtracking syndrome. As I said before, the introduction of the two-handed axe allows you to explore new areas of dungeons that you couldn't visit prior. This is a fun way to encourage players to revisit places and still feel like they're in new territory, which plays to the strengths of a game like Tales of Iron that can't really afford 10 million different zones for development. However, I don't know what it is, but who the fuck is running around putting everything back up when I leave? What minimum wage rat labourer is scurrying around behind me and repairing every single shattered barricade just to deliberately inconvenience me and me only? The whole point of these obstacles is so I need a certain item to progress through areas, to further pace the game. So when I get said item, it's a fair enough assumption that I don't need to be repeatedly stopped and searched by a fucking set of Marlin Webb vines. lines. And Jesus Christ, depicted as a rat, how many times are you going to send me back down into the sewers? Oddbug Studios, this is the 7th week in a row you've shown the sewers in class. The third issue is a bit more peripheral, but the number of heavies and parry attacks are way too much. These offensive moves are advertised in the tutorial as heavily telegraphed special instances where the payoff for dodging or parrying it will give you a great opportunity to counter and deal damage. These would intercede the barrage of regular attacks, animated strikes that you'd have to block or preempt with a parry. But what ended up happening instead is that these unblockables and parry attacks were so frequent they ended up becoming the norm, and instead the regular attacks became oddly more terrifying due to their infrequency and lack of a telegraph indicator. This isn't necessarily a problem, but I found it odd how the moves intended to be these fearsome maneuvers became the norm due to their common use, whereas mundane regular strikes became far more terrifying. You know what is absolutely a problem, however? These fucking hitboxes. This guy. You see this guy? Well, guess what? I also had to see this guy. Honestly, a lot more than I fucking wish I had to. This is a mid-game boss that is somehow more difficult than one of the secret bosses. Why? Because of this bastard's ridiculous hitboxes. Clearly Oddbug Studios is not familiar with physics, so look, I'll annotate this for you. This stab move with the monster stinger applies its lethal force this way. This means that our little frog racist will be sent this way. If the move lands, this is the expected trajectory of which Reggie will go flying. So, Oddbug Studios, I would like you to enlighten me as to how I can dodge underneath this, and the game tells me that it still hit me, yet somehow it sends me this way, the complete opposite direction to the attack. How could it have possibly struck me if it has defied the physics of which hitting me works? I have the answer. One of you is bested by the concept of a mere box. And, while we're here, Oddbug Studios, what about the time that the telegraph indicator of one of the bosses just stopped working, meaning I had little to no method for distinguishing the minute differences in the wind-up animations of their numerous unblockables and their one single parry move, condemning me to a gruesome death repeatedly and my brain to an unending aneurysm. All of this, funnily enough, begins to bug me. It bugs me so much that I feel compelled to level a magnifying glass at said bugs and fry them with the unmatched power of the fucking sun. The point is that, beyond the hyperbole of my anger, these small inconveniences do pile up in places. The closest this all came to a head was when I almost got soft-locked in a boss fight I couldn't beat because you can't go back through older save states, and I'd accidentally saved on low health before a boss encounter that blocked my way back to a healing station. For 2 long hours I fought, mouth open to unleash a guttural wail of anguish, before I accidentally killed an invisible bug on the floor and got healing juice from it. A bug that, had it been visible 2 hours ago, would have spared me much of the torment this fight sought to bring me. I am sure there are other players who have also endured some of these hitches during their playthroughs, people who weren't too fond of the oxymoronic nature of the side quests, or the glitched boss fights, or returning to the sewers for the 10 billionth time and getting bested by a few planks of wood. So, pray tell, Smug, now that you've butchered this game with a 2-handed woodcutting axe, why do you hold Tales of Iron in such high regard? Well, my dear viewer, it's because it's the first furry game that hasn't made me want to immediately puke.
It seems that you've become aroused, young ape.
As I iterated before, I am fond of furry media. I think there's a lot of creative real estate to work with when using animal people, especially when in the fantasy genre, because it allows you to completely construct a new world from the ground up. But upon hearing the words furry media, you have no doubt not envisaged a piece of art that uses a world of animal people to construct an alien environment that promotes a curiosity to explore in the player, but instead, Winds of Change. Winds of Change is the poster boy for the sense of generic mediocrity that the phrase furry media elicits in the minds of most people. A milquetoast narrative, bouts of laughable dialogue, and a visual design that rivals my persisting sexual confusion, which may make you wonder why it has an overwhelmingly positive rating on its Steam page. That's because God is not real, justice is not fated, and critical acclaim is being determined not by those craving an experience that changes their perspective or leaves them with the bittersweet satisfaction of a good story's conclusion, but instead, those craving to beat the shit out of their genitalia. To trust in the media literacy of the average furry is to be at the whim of their penis.
Dude, I wanna jerk off! Fuck, I wanna jerk off!
Now, am I any better? No. I saw an image of Link drawn as a horseboy with a posterior that can only be likened to not a single bakery, but an entire franchise chain, and now my right arm is capable of leveling entire buildings. Why did I go on this spiel? Because a lot of the time, furry media is a gimmick. Games and movies and TV shows where their only cultural impact is how many furry porn artists will draw their animal people characters. It's not seen as an interesting aesthetic to enrich the standings of an already good story, or respected as a sincere alternative to typical fantasy races and aliens that are already entrenched in media. Try to visualize this as a meal, a succulent Chinese meal. Anthro characters, to me, are garnish. They enrich and enliven the overall product, make it more novel than it would have been originally, but without them, the dish is still damn worth eating. For the average dish of furry media, however, the garnish is the dish. It's all fucking chopped parsley. It can be completely disarmed of its significance by removing this single ingredient. When presenting Anthro characters, there's a lot of different options. There's, of course, the sexy way. Zenless Zone Zero is only known because of this guy and the numerous pieces of flattering art. Then you go to the complete opposite direction, where animal characters are far more reminiscent of their feral roots, such as in Tales of Iron, where the rats and mice have their characteristic rotund lower bodies, as do the frog spawn. And then you have the third option, the Cats movie option.
Oh my god!
The manifestation of Uncanny Valley that leaves the viewer seated with a profound discomfort. I felt this when looking for music for this video, stumbled upon a video essay about Tooth and Tail, and was confronted with 10 minutes of a FNAF animatronic talking to me and staring straight into my eyes. From one comrade to another, Mr. Ferret, I sincerely mean this when I say, this is incredibly uncomfortable to watch, please change this. Oddly enough, despite technically being furry, Tales of Iron's iteration of Anthro characters is more friendly to a mainstream audience than something like Zenless Zone Zero would be. I do think this is because the word furry has more connotations to characters of greater humanoid reminiscence, as opposed to the characters of Tales of Iron who are less humanoid and more just bipedal evolutions of how we'd know them today. For Tales of Iron, I think this works really well in their favour. It can be hard to make mainstream audiences see Anthro media beyond this gimmick lens of being furry. Anecdotally, I relate, because when trying to market the fantasy series I'm making, it doesn't matter how I phrase the premise of animal people in a new world, because if a reader has any internet knowledge at all, they'll just retort with, "So it's a furry book," and I'll be enveloped with shame. This can genuinely be a struggle with new intellectual property, especially from small studios or creators, because it then just gets compared back to its most mediocre counterparts without even being tried. This also can inadvertently make your game far more niche and inaccessible for mainstream audiences as, due to the connotations of the phrase, they disengage and see it as solely for the consumption of those who go around barking in public. So not only did Tales of Iron pick an Anthro design that is most removed from this term of both unwarranted and warranted stigma, affording them greater appeal to mainstream audiences based on the merit of the game's design, it also led them to creating the crux of this video essay's topic: the creativity. Valiant Hearts is a name you probably haven't heard in the last 10 years, if at all. It can be referred to as one of Ubisoft's last good games of the 2010s, when Assassin's Creed was Assassin's Creed and a new Splinter Cell game was a genuine possibility. What made Valiant Hearts so worth remembering to me was not just how it managed to turn World War I into a fun puzzle game, a setting used as a broodmare for realistic shooters that live shorter than a butterfly, it was crucially the presentation. Valiant Hearts utilised a 2.5D art style, where sprites were these charmingly drawn 2D models, but levels and areas still had a sense of depth to them. It allowed for the creation of an intriguing background and foreground, providing greater life to the scenery, whether it was a party before a march out to war, or fighting in the trenches against armed foes. All the characters had their eyes shadowed by fringes and helmets. They spoke with no text, but instead speech bubbled with images accompanied by murmurs of French and German, and environments sported a remarkable diversity in colour, from the bustling cities to the wastelands of a Western Front. Tales of Iron seems to have taken strong inspiration from this manner of visual presentation, and it creates a world that invites and captivates your attention. The sprites for the characters were hand-drawn, and the artistic talent of those working at Oddbug Studios is put on display for all to see. From the attire of every different NPC to how they're animated in numerous positions and situations, there's a surprising amount of polish to the art and animation for such a small team. A weapon swing feels powerful and cumbersome for our short king, accompanied with a tangible impact behind every blow. parrying an attack is intense and gratifying. It's such a visceral riposte against an enemy that compels you to start swinging and take advantage of your counter window. But the art and animation doesn't just exist to convey the intensity of combat. The charming art direction and animation work lends itself well to the world building of Tales of Iron. The Crimson Fort, the citadel your father erected following his victory against the Frogspawn, has many servants sweeping the floors and wandering the halls. The chef stands amidst a gallery of meats and vegetables, serving you delectable dishes to buff your health points, provided you bring him the required ingredients. You get to enjoy such delightful meals like the mushroom burger, the roasted grub leg, and the Moldtown burger. Each one gets gobbled up in adorable fashion. Then you have the blacksmith's quarters, where he's constantly fanning the flames and molding the metal for you to craft new gear with your blueprints. Yet this place isn't static, just like the other areas of the game. Longtail Village starts off in ruin. Everything's on fire, the streets are littered with the dead and dying, and the town hall has been ransacked by frog marauders. As the game continues and you complete more and more quests to consolidate your power, everything gets repaired. Hordes of overall-clad workers take to the streets, heaving buckets of water and planks of wood around to put out fires and repair infrastructure. This gradual transformation of both key areas invokes a sense of life just in this alone. Once fully repaired, Longtail Village is a bustling hub of life. You see rat pups running back and forth in the background, villagers playing musical instruments, and traders standing beside their stalls. The path to the watchtower is cleared for safer traversal. The Ranger's Lodge sees activity once more as hooded rats chop up grubs for delicious bug juice. And oh my god, Moldtown. Moldtown is this brilliant area that could be a standalone game. It's an area reminiscent of Metro Exodus, a place run and owned by the Bolshevik Republic that is technologically advanced, sporting Soviet-era uniforms and hats, and is always packing that Russian heat. Just the name Bolshevik Republic makes me smile because it's creative while also being silly and self-aware of said silliness. You've got people walking around through the station, you've got guards and soldiers patrolling around, you have some mole kids playing on their Moltendo Switches, and even a side room where all of the Oddbug Studio developers work as moles. This area is great for the arena bosses and all the fun that brings, but the character that this Anthro-Soviet steampunk fantasy area has is just so fun. Sometimes I'd go back and just stand around to watch the background. And you really come to appreciate the life of these zones by their accompanying dungeons. You have the sewers, the mines, and the underground crypts. Each of them are stark contrasts to their bustling counterparts, and their environments tell tale of their history. The sewers were once the thriving civilizations of your ancestors, places you emerged from to take to the surface. You see remains of crude stone architecture and platforms, rotting wooden ladders and rusting metal pipes. The crypts are the home of your clan predecessors, tombs and mass graves that have seen better days, yet not completely abandoned to time. Sarcophagi, locked doors, and rows upon rows of urns form the bulk of the items and furniture you see in the halls of antiquity. And then the lower sections of the mines, neglected and forsaken depths where many a miner has fallen and succumbed to the hostile region. Toxic gas, crumbling wooden support beams, skeletons of the dead, and even more fucking bug. The ambience of each reinforces the isolation of these zones. It's not just silence, but instead the crumbling of stone beneath Reggie's pattering feet, the echoing creak of the ladder as you descend further into danger, the whistling wind through the tunnels, and the rustle of the canopy as you run through the swamps. The distant grinding of rails in Moldtown, the signs of life are accompanied by the cacophony they usually bring, and it makes returning to these areas almost like a sanctuary. It's here, where everything is loud and alive, that you understand you're safe from the numerous monsters and the aneurysm they come with. And all of this works to achieve a state of curious motivation in the player. By playing the game and advancing further through the story, you get to uncover more about the world of Tales of Iron. A lot of the animals are domesticated bugs. You get your milk from cow bugs, ugly motherfuckers sporting the characteristic black and white. In fact, your entire diet is based on bugs. You get bug juice from grubs and other nasty creatures, a substance you need to heal during fights, and a lot of your food is based on these scuttling fellas. Hell, your economy is partially based on bugs. You can trade bug parts for items and other forms of currency. There are some secrets that spur you on to explore every nook and cranny of the world, something that pairs well with the system of returning to new sections of previous areas. I'd argue that really it's not the narrative that motivates you to see this all through, but instead the intriguing world that invites you to keep playing. And there's charm even down to how the characters squeak and use images and speech bubbles to talk instead of voices, which is a cute aspect of a world, but also implies the development of completely alien languages. And it's all because of the culmination of these delightful components in the world building and the art direction and the sound design that make me care. Yeah, the story's pretty straightforward, it lags in places, and the main conflict's conclusion is a bit rushed, but I cared about our Bolshevik friend Jay. I fucking cried out his name when he died. There are AAA games with entire galleries of writers that fail to make me so much as blink at a character
He
death.
held back. The sound of his small friend's body falling lifted the spell. Reggie didn't know what this thing was.
What, he's dead?
That it would die screaming.
Did Jay die? What? You can't just kill him, are you serious? The only thing I can really fault Tales of Iron for in this creative ensemble is the audio. While the ambience is great, I am glad they went for the Valiant Hearts picture in bubble talking. It not only saves a small studio a lot of money on development to put into other areas, I can only imagine the voice acting work wouldn't have been that great anyway. I know they got Gerald of Rivia to voice this game, but I just don't gel with the narration. The voice is too gruff, the delivery sometimes feels weird, and it just feels like the wrong voice. Maybe it's because Wayne Jr. spoiled me, I don't know, but I wasn't a massive fan of this acting. And musically the game is extremely lacking. The most you get in terms of boss fight music is the playing of drums in the background by two frog drummers, which is cute, I do like that they're there, but there's no variety to it. The final fight against the guy who killed your dad didn't feel like a concluding fight when I got there, because the music for it was exactly the same as every other track. There was nothing to denote that this was the crowning moment of the game. Anyway, I would recommend blasting some Guilty Gear music during the boss segments, it makes everything a lot more fun. One of the things that irks me with modern media is that so much of it doesn't have an ending. Anything upwards of decent that brings in significant cash usually can't be left to a dignified end. The writers can't be trusted to make anything else as good as it, and the audience can't be trusted to engage with anything that doesn't have a recognizable brand tacked onto it like a tumor. So a lot of media ends up as a business model, not a definitive piece of art. Everything needs to now have a cinematic universe and 20 million different spin-offs and sequels that end up invalidating the original source material, and oh wow, what's Star Wars doing on my screen? Point is that nothing is allowed to die and be remembered fondly in the creative arts as of now. If it can make more money, it will be kept on life support until it's shriveled to the size of a grape. And this does lead to a lack of diversity in what we see nowadays. Everything has been a remaster or a reboot or a 10th redoing of The Last of Us because profit incentive is heat seeking. And what lets off more heat than another installment in a recognizable brand, whether it belongs there or not? And I think this is in part as to why we see so little of furry media, at least good ones anyway. When what's successful and what isn't is being determined by how recognizable a brand is and not the quality of said brand's stories, it's a worrying precedent that seeks to blot out new avenues of interesting expression and artistry. When the pilot for Lackadaisy dropped, the internet was enraptured with this anthropomorphic retelling of the Prohibition era, and rightfully so. But unless it's got a Marvel logo slapped on it, this fantastic animation will get dismissed as some furry cartoon garbage for kids. I bring this up because when I beat Tales of Iron, when I went back and played through it all on Bloody Whiskers mode and suffered numerous brain injuries completing every single achievement and eventually got to the end where I was standing in our late father's bedchambers after having defeated the secret boss upstairs, I felt melancholic. I was sad. I was sad because I had got to the end, there was nothing else to do. I felt like I had exhausted this experience of every new, novel and challenging thing left. I felt like crying, I mean that. And is it because Tales of Iron is the perfect game, the crowning jewel of which all other interactive media looks up to? No, absolutely not. Mechanically, this game is rough around the edges, not just in how buggy some parts were, but in some aspects of its intentional design. But when you pair this with the world building, and the hand-drawn art, and the adorable chittering dialogue, and the sense of exploration, and the sound design, and the visceral feel of the combat animations, and the unhampered flowing creativity tangible in every minute detail of aesthetic, design, and environment, that stuff just doesn't matter to me anymore. Its negative effects on the overall experience are almost completely mitigated in my eyes. The fact I had already experienced this game for the first time and never could again was so defining in my love both then and now for Tales of Iron, and a lot of it comes down to the care that went into all of those aspects I just listed. I very earnestly look forward to a sequel for Tales of Iron, whether that has us follow the tale of Reggie once more, or perhaps puts us in a different position as another denizen of the forest. I'm sure that Oddbug Studios have learned a lot from making this game, and that they'll come back for the next installment stronger than ever before, pairing the novel character design of Anthro characters with a world that will keep inviting the player to explore. It's not just that I think Oddbug Studios finally did an Anthro aesthetic justice meaningfully. It's also why Tales of Iron brings joy through its creativity. Now I could end the video there, conclude on this sentimental appreciation of artistic integrity in an industry so devoid of it, but instead I think we should round out with a question, an appeal to your philosophical perspective. Did I make this video because of a genuine love for Tales of Iron and, despite its mechanical shortcomings, all it artistically achieves with Anthro characters in a weird and foreign world? Or did I make this video because I wanted to write a bit about Horselink's arse?